finished our new kingfisher pond, a project which we filmed as it progressed, and there'll be a link to that film in the description box below. Next up is a companion watery habitat that we've also been planning, the no bullshit pond. I'll explain why we've decided to call it the no bullshit pond later on in the film, but it's going to be behind this hedge, a section of the oasis which has been left neglected for the past few years, as you're about to see. 40 years ago, we had quite a big Japanese garden that was much admired by visitors, including a long, deep pond, complete with a wooden bridge painted red. There were dwarf pine trees, stone lanterns, and a statue of Buddha. But a while back, it was obvious that the dwarf pine trees had grown far too big. At first, we considered a straightforward revamp, but the available space was even bigger. For over 20 years, next to the Japanese garden, we had a natterjack toad breeding enclosure, including a shallow pond, which was a tremendous success until that project also ran its course. Yet another bit of the adjoining land was used for badly injured hedgehogs that sadly couldn't be released back into the wild. Again, that's now in the past. So, first up, we're going to clear this whole area. And that includes very old hedges on 3 sides, which have become monsters, difficult to maintain. Once again, team, let's get to work. To look a bit better. You can get more of an idea of the old Japanese garden pond now that we've chopped down the 25-foot trees that were growing in it and removed umpteen wheelbarrows of gunk. The dwarf conifers are looking a bit smaller now. Next up, we're going to cut down the monster hedges. Okay, that's most of the clearing done, and we've got the marker posts in. This pond is going to be about 10 times bigger than our last one, 40 metres by 19 metres, although that includes a 3-metre strip of bog garden along the upper side. The water will need to be 2.5 metres deep, 8 feet, dictated by the degree of our slope, plus how much soil we'll need for the dam wall. That's really too much to dig out by hand, although we could do it if there was no other choice. And we are stripping off the topsoil, just using spades and wheelbarrows. But on this occasion, for most of the work, we're bringing in heavy machinery. The digging will be done by this amazing 15-ton excavator. It's been generously loaned to us by Morris Leslie Plant Hire, which we massively appreciate. Colin Jordan has been brilliant. We all purposely work on a non-paid basis, disliking the inefficiency and ineffectiveness of most charities, including the huge amount of money that's wasted by paying themselves salaries. We're proud to be different. Our friend Nick has dug out half a dozen big ponds or small lakes before, including his own. He's kindly spending a bit of time getting us going, showing us how to do it. We've done our homework and it's all planned out, but experience is invaluable. Okay, Nick, let's dig. this 3.5-tonne dumper truck. It's mid-October with several days of rain forecast, so we need a tracked dumper. A normal one with wheels could easily get stuck in the mud. We're really grateful to Steve, the MD of Rabbit and Dowling Plant Hire, for lending it to us free of charge. Whereas our previous pond needed a liner, we're using compressed clay subsoil this time, which we've got in abundance, and it should hold water. And this is how it's done, with the sheep's foot roller. This third and vital bit of machinery has also been loaned to us free of charge. We're very grateful to Andrew Barker, MD of the TCP Group, and to Dave for visiting the site to assess what was best to use. Progressing really well and would have had the lower slopes finished before a named storm hit, bringing 3 days of heavy rain. At least, that was the plan. We arrived back on site early the next morning when it was still dark. To our absolute horror, the excavator was in the process of bursting into flames. And within a few minutes, it rapidly got worse. We called the fire brigade and 2 fire crews soon arrived on site. They quickly got the blaze under control. We'd especially like to praise the professionalism of Chris, Lee and Neil of the West Sussex Fire Brigade. There was 0 chance of arson, and we'd correctly turned everything off and locked up the evening before. Colin of Morris Leslie quickly came to inspect, together with his chief mechanic, followed by a mechanic from JCB a couple of days later. The fire had obviously been caused by some kind of electrical fault, but the severe heat had melted so much that the exact details couldn't be determined. Obviously, and frustratingly, we've now got water in the bottom part of our unfinished pond. It's been raining for over a week, with more still forecast. Speedy Services, Gatwick branch, have kindly loaned us this pump to get the water out. They've helped us several times before with various hire equipment. And we'd like to take this opportunity to thank Kenny Carter and Matt Pay for their ongoing support, which is always appreciated. We're doing our best to save the water, and it's being tested to check there are no contaminants as a result of the fire before pumping it back into the pond when we've eventually finished digging. It's now another week on, and we've had more and more heavy rain, as you can see next to me. And it's not about to stop. We're about to be hit by a second named storm with the associated risk of flooding. We're doing our absolute best to save as much water as possible, but there's a limit. It's such a shame because we were so close to finishing, and we could now have been celebrating that we've had so much rainfall. There's no natural source of running water this high up on our land, so we need to be inventive. It'll take over 1 million litres of water to fill the pond, and it would be a couple of years before it naturally filled up by rainfall alone from the sky above. A big part of our plan is water collection and storage. 2 large 20,000 litre tanks will help enormously. This one's just been delivered today. We're grateful to Neil Mackenzie, MD of E-Tills Limited, for his generosity. Initially, this tank will temporarily be filled with water pumped out of the unfinished pond. Then, for the next few months, both tanks will be used to store runoff from around the oasis, periodically transferred to help fill the pond. Long term, once the pond is full, this tank will be used to collect the overflowing water during the wetter winter months, putting it back in the summer to compensate for evaporation. It's been 2.5 weeks since the fire. A replacement excavator has just arrived to finish the job. Thank you, Colin. Okay, take 2. Let's dig. At the crucial point where the pond is ready for water, permanently. Have kindly helped us with the loan of this laser level so we can make sure that the edges of the pond are all the same height. The burnt out excavator still hasn't been taken away. So, yet again, there's going to be another lengthy delay before we can finish that side of the pond. It'll be a difficult job because we're on a slope, far away from the road. Therefore you can't get a crane anywhere nearby to lift it onto a transporter. And the ground is now saturated. We've come up with a method of using tree trunks at the edge of the margins to keep the topsoil in position. We can now start to move the topsoil into place. The original plan was to use the machinery. But what happened. So we're doing this part by hand, with spades and wheelbarrows. They won't catch fire or get stuck in the mud. Moving the topsoil has been a slow and exasperating process, simply because it's now saturated, following a lot of rain. Being clay, it's unbelievably sticky. Waiting until spring, when it would start to dry out again in the warmer weather, wasn't an option. So we've just got on with it. But it hasn't been fun. In fact, it's been bloody awful. It's now mid-December and I'm planting hundreds of water irises and other aquatics in the margins. They've died down for the winter, so it's a good time to transplant them, although your hands get very cold. By May, they'll be looking great. Over the past 42 years, we've built up a tremendous resource of plant material. We've got sufficient aquatic plants to go around over 100 metres of margins of our new large pond by thinning out what's been growing in 3 other ponds within the Oasis Gardens. After lots of discussion discussion between insurance companies, I'm relieved to tell you that the perished excavator is finally going to be taken away. More than 2 months since that shocking early morning when the fire happened. It'll be winched out. The water level has risen dangerously high, so it's good that it's happening now. Loved that first excavator. Despite the electrical fire, JCB have designed a great machine. We were going to use the 8-ton excavator hired by the recovery team for a few hours when they finished. Then one of them offered to finish the pond wall for us. At first, we were pleased until we saw the soil wasn't being compressed. Everywhere is incredibly muddy now, and the access route has been badly messed up by the recovery process. I said at the beginning of the film that we could do it all by hand if we had to. And that's how we've decided to finish everything, by hand, rather than waiting until spring. It's been what you might call a muddy Christmas. But, as you can see, we've got the pond wall to the correct height, doing everything properly. And we finished planting the margins. Spring has finally arrived, after one of the wettest winters on record. And the pond's full. We had 675 millimetres of rain between when we started digging in October and the end of March. The 1,000 or so aquatic plants that I put in the margins during December are regrowing with the beginning of a bit of warmer weather. I've planted over 2,000 perennials in an extensive bog garden strip along one length of the pond, which will look amazing once everything's established. The pond depth ended up being 3 metres, 10 foot, a bit more than the planned 2.5 metres, because of how much subsoil was needed for constructing the dam wall. The dam wall's been covered with topsoil and sown with grass seed, which is starting to germinate. And we've planted a few shrubs along it to help with the landscaping. An overflow pipe's in position and working well. Plus, we've created an emergency spillway as a secondary measure. We've added a flocculant to the water to help the fine suspended clay particles bind together and sink to the bottom. Beforehand, the water was muddy or brown looking, restricting light penetration, but it's noticeably clearer now. We did the same with our kingfisher pond. You see the significant difference that the flocculants made in these test samples. Thank you to Griff of GPC Clear Solutions for his kind help. A brood of 14 mallard ducklings have just hatched here at the Oasis. They're mainly foraging on one of our well-established ponds where there's more available food. But they sometimes go for a wander to check out the new much bigger No Bullshit pond, which offers them a lot more space to explore. Finally, it's now May, when I said the pond would be starting to look great. Some of the irises are flowering, but it's just been a few months since they were planted, so it'll be next spring and the ones after when we get the more spectacular displays. And that brings me to what I said we'd get back to early on in the film. Why are we calling this the No Bullshit pond? The main reason is to go against the twee messaging of greenie environmentalists. There's been a lot of nonsense, bullshit, talked and written about wildlife gardening over the past 30 years or so. This includes dubious advice about garden ponds. There's definitely a need for them to help compensate for the loss of at least 100,000 ponds during the past 50 years or so. Where it gets silly, very silly, to the point of becoming counterproductive. It's when greenies bleat on about how you must only use native aquatic plants. It doesn't work, simply because they're mostly weedy and rampant, usually mismatched with the typical small-sized garden pond, which quickly becomes overgrown and messy. Our native iris, Iris pseudochorus, is a clear example of this. It's a monster, far too big and sprawling for most garden ponds. It's far, far better to use garden varieties of aquatic irises for garden ponds. They're much more compact, so won't quickly get out of control. There are ones with stunning variegated leaves, as well as a choice of colourful flowers. This is a cultivar or garden variety of our native iris, far more suitable than the much bigger wild version. And if you're a dragonfly larva or nymph, ready to emerge from the water before turning into an adult dragonfly, you don't mind what there is to cling on to. Anything will do. We've got water lilies in the pond. Again, we're not using the native species, which has lovely white flowers but grows enormous, therefore more suited to very big ponds and lakes. Instead, we decided upon a garden variety with attractive mottled leaves and yellow flowers. We've had it here at the oasis for decades, and it does as well as our native species. But, importantly, it's not as rampant, yet it's just as good for wildlife. Water quality is hugely important, and the marginal plants are essential. Fish, amphibians and aquatic invertebrates, plus ducks, geese, herons and other birds, produce large amounts of waste in the form of ammonia. This has to be turned into nitrites, then into nitrates, which becomes food for the plant life. Our mass planting of aquatics and bog garden plants are having a tremendous positive impact on the water quality. Our no bullshit pond is within the gardens section of the oasis, so we've exclusively used cultivated garden plants. It's still early days, but this watery habitat is already becoming a huge magnet for local wildlife. What we've done works, plain and simple. We get our hands dirty. We're practical, with over 40 years of professional wildlife conservation experience, so we absolutely know what we're talking about. What we're saying and doing is 100% ecologically sound. The greenies are wrong, misguided, playing at being environmentalists. They need to get real and grow up. They continually mislead the public with their twee-biased information. By contrast, we're logical and evidence-based. Wildlife organisations and greenies are also usually prejudiced in favour of aquatic invertebrates and amphibians, with fish being more or less overlooked, sometimes even demonised. Yes, of course, our native fish will predate on many of the smaller creatures. That's nature. But they're still part of the ecosystem, an important part if you're a kingfisher or heron. So we've got several species of fish, beginning with roach, which is iconic to English rivers, streams, canals, lakes and ponds. Another is rudd, a very similar species, adapted to feeding at or near the surface. And we've got perch, a predator. Tench are predominantly bottom feeders, medium-sized, olive green in colour. Another tremendous addition. The biggest fish going into our pond are carp, which are often frowned upon by wildlife experts. Though not originally found here, they've nevertheless now been resident in England for over 600 years, introduced by monks towards the end of the Middle Ages. We've got common carp, which have a regular scale pattern all over their bodies. And we've got mirror carp, a different form of the same carp species with a variety of scale patterns. You'll see all of the fish in future updates, but I can tell you now that we've got some real beauties. Perhaps even more controversially, we've also got a couple of ghost carp, which is a natural cross between the common carp or mirror carp and the domesticated koi carp. The no bullshit pond is within our gardens section, so we think this choice of having a couple of ghosties is justified, especially because one of our aims is to highlight the beauty of fish, something that's frequently missed by wildlife enthusiasts. Ghosties are found in many large ponds and lakes that contain carp, so they're not just ornamentals. Our carp and some of the tench are still young at the moment and therefore extremely vulnerable to being snatched by herons or cormorants. So we're growing most of these fish on in 2 smaller ponds, which are fully netted, as you can see, until they're bigger. We're aerating the water of these stock ponds to ensure a plentiful supply of dissolved oxygen. Many thanks to Bibus and Ecofiltration for their help with what was needed for this. Coppens have donated 25 kilograms of specialist pellets, ideal for optimum growth. We aim to showcase the magnificence of these fish as they grow, not least the carp. The plan is to measure and weigh them once a year, in late autumn, as part of an annual survey. We're confident that the no bullshit pond will be good for fish and other aquatic life, with our extensive shallow margins being of particular importance for the latter. But if you think otherwise, keep tuned to see what actually happens over the years. The fish have been kindly donated by top professional fish farmers, outstanding individuals who each have a clear and practical conservation ethic. A big thank you to Tony Campbell of the island's carp fishery, Viv Shears and Simon Scott of VS Fisheries, and Aaron Standing of Coarse Fish UK. Plus enthusiast Anthony Hurst, who's preserving the older Leany strain of carp. Our friend Dylan gave us excellent advice, encouraging us to get the very best fish available, anywhere, which we've done. So we did it, despite the totally unexpected fire threatening to stop us halfway through this project, plus all the disruption, rain and mud that followed. It turned out to be a lot of work, much more than we've talked about or shown in this film. For example, getting 40 years of bamboo root out of 100 tonnes of topsoil was a nightmare in itself. There'll be regular updates on how the pond is maturing and how the carp, tench and other fish are growing. So please subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't already done so, and hit the bell for notifications. If you're interested in joining our team, there'll be details in the description box below. Finally, thank you again to everyone who helped make this project possible.